The universe, in its truest form, possesses no concept of mercy, malice, or morality. It is a silent, sprawling void, gripped by absolute zero and governed strictly by unfeeling, unyielding physical laws. To the Galactic Alliance, a sprawling, ancient collective of thousands of advanced extraterrestrial species that had long ago reached the pinnacle of logical thought and technological singularity, the cosmos was nothing more than a colossal, beautifully decoded mathematical equation. Every star's death, every planetary orbit, and every diplomatic interaction was calculated, predicted, and managed with sterile perfection. But then, a mere 3 centuries ago, a bizarre, chaotic anomaly tore through the neat fabric of their equations. A fledgling species from a harsh, unforgiving Class 4 death world known as Earth clumsily broke the faster-than-light barrier and stumbled onto the galactic stage. They were loud. They were entirely unpredictable. They were profoundly fragile. And yet, humanity possessed a terrifying, paradoxical resilience that defied every logical model the Alliance possessed. The deep space exploration vessel Vagabond drifted silently through the treacherous, perpetually grinding gray asteroid belt of the Sirius star system. On the outside, the ship looked less like a triumph of engineering and more like a heavily armored metal brick, scarred by micrometeorite impacts and patched with mismatched alloys. Inside, however, it hummed with the warm, stubborn pulse of human habitation. Within the cramped confines of the bridge, bathed in the soft, amber glow of the secondary LED arrays, Captain Elias Vance stood before a worn console. Elias was a man sculpted by the harsh realities of deep space. His dark hair was heavily salted with gray, and his forearms, exposed by the rolled-up sleeves of his standard-issue jumpsuit, bore a map of faint, jagged scars, souvenirs of boarding actions, catastrophic depressurizations, and bar fights on frontier stations. At this precise moment, the seasoned captain was entirely focused on a task of utmost importance. Carefully pouring a steaming, dark brown, viscous liquid from a battered thermal flask into a chipped porcelain mug that read "World's Okayest Boss." Standing a few paces behind him, observing the ritual with profound, calculated confusion, was Kalen. Kalen was the Vagabond's navigator and a member of the Zatari, an ancient civilization fundamentally based on silicon crystal biology rather than carbon. His body resembled a tall, sharply angled humanoid carved from translucent quartz. Deep within his crystalline structure, brilliant streams of blue bioenergy pulsed and flowed, moving rhythmically like the beating of a highly advanced electronic heart. Kalen did not require sustenance, oxygen, or sleep. He perceived the universe entirely through the lens of statistical probability, quantum mechanics, and absolute logic. Captain Elias, Kalen's synthesized voice resonated through the bridge. It was perfectly modulated, entirely devoid of emotional inflection, yet somehow managed to convey a sense of distinct disapproval. I have continuously monitored this specific behavioral pattern of yours for the past 4 standard time cycles. My internal analytical subsystems indicate that the heated liquid you are currently preparing to consume contains a dangerously high concentration of 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine, commonly known as caffeine. It is documented as a mild neurotoxin to carbon-based life forms. You are, by definition, voluntarily poisoning your own central nervous system. Elias paused, bringing the mug to his face to inhale the rich, earthy, slightly burnt aroma. He closed his eyes, savoring the scent that promised to banish the bone-deep exhaustion of a grueling 16-hour shift navigating gravity wells. He let out a low, raspy chuckle, a distinctly human sound of amusement that always caused Kalen's auditory processors to momentarily glitch. "Kalen, my glowing friend," Elias said, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The bitter heat washed down his throat, instantly sparking his tired synapses back to life. "You are absolutely right. It is a toxin. It raises my blood pressure, accelerates my heart rate, and artificially blocks my brain's fatigue receptors. But out here, on the edge of the uncharted black, sometimes a little bit of poison is the only thing that keeps us sharp enough to survive the far more toxic, lethal things waiting for us in the dark. It's what we call the human paradox. The azure energy streams inside Kalen's chest flickered and accelerated, a physical manifestation of his cognitive algorithms attempting to process conflicting data points. Paradox, Kalen repeated, the word tasting strange on his vocal synthesizer, a concept that inherently represents a systemic failure in logic. This is precisely the reason the Alliance Senate has repeatedly denied humanity permanent residency within the inner ring. You make critical decisions based on unstable, fluctuating chemical reactions you categorize as emotions rather than relying on empirical risk calculation. You deliberately shatter your own vessels by pushing engines past their structural limits, patch them together with cheap, rudimentary materials, and then proudly label the resulting disaster flexibility. Elias turned around, leaning against the navigation console. He looked past Kalen, his gaze fixing on the reinforced transparent aluminum viewport. Outside, massive chunks of primordial rock tumbled through the void, ancient and indifferent. The Galactic Alliance in the inner ring is undoubtedly safe, Kalen, Elias mused, his voice dropping to a quieter, more reflective octave. They have calculated everything to an absolute, flawless perfection. There is no hunger, no disease, no sudden mechanical failures. But that perfection is also a cage. They are so terrified of the unknown, so paralyzed by the mere probability of an uncalculated variable, that they haven't explored a new sector in a millennia. They never leave their perfectly sterile safe zones. Elias took another sip of the dark liquid, gesturing with a mug. Earth wasn't born from order. We were born from sheer, unadulterated chaos. Our ancestors survived brutal ice ages that froze the oceans, plagues that wiped out halves of continents, and devastating, apocalyptic wars that we waged against our own kind. Flaws are woven into our very DNA. They make us fragile, yes. They make us prone to making spectacularly stupid mistakes. But that same chaotic imperfection is what taught us how to adapt. It taught us how to stubbornly stand back up and rebuild every single time we shattered. Kalen stood perfectly still, his optical sensors whirring faintly as he analyzed the captain's words. With his complex silicon brain structure, he perfectly translated the vocabulary, syntax, and historical context of Elias's speech. Yet, assembling those abstract concepts into a logical, solvable equation proved entirely impossible. To find strength in weakness was a mathematical fallacy. Therefore, Kalen finally concluded, his lights dimming slightly in resignation. You actively choose to consume this bitter, boiling toxin as a ritualistic reminder of your own biological vulnerability and chaotic heritage. Elias blinked, staring at the alien navigator for a long moment before a wide grin broke across his scarred face. He pushed himself off the console. No, Kalen, Elias laughed, setting the chipped mug down onto a magnetic coaster. I drink this terrible stuff because yesterday, our chief engineer Lyra bypassed a blown fuse in the water filtration system. And right now, this heavily roasted coffee is literally the only thing on the ship with a flavor strong enough to mask the overwhelming taste of recycled engine coolant. Kalen let out a prolonged, multi-tonal beep, a sound that Elias had long ago identified as the Zatari equivalent of a heavy, long-suffering sigh. Your species is infuriatingly inconsistent. Perhaps, Elias conceded, his smile lingering. But the philosophical lesson behind it still holds immense value. Before Kalen could formulate a rebuttal regarding the sheer inefficiency of human metaphors, the peaceful quiet of the bridge was violently shattered. The central tactical display, previously projecting a calm blue map of the asteroid belt, suddenly strobed with a harsh, blinding crimson light. A piercing multi-frequency klaxon screamed through the ship's internal speakers. Elias's relaxed posture vanished instantly, replaced by the coiled tension of a predator. He slammed a hand onto the comms panel. "Report," Elias barked. "Captain," Kalen stated, his energy streams pulsing violently as he interfaced directly with the ship's sensors. "We are intercepting an emergency distress beacon. Maximum priority, code red. It is piercing straight through the localized subspace interference." The journey of human absurdity, logic-defying chaos, and unyielding survival had officially begun. The crimson emergency lighting bathed the Vagabond's bridge in a harsh, bloody glow, casting long, sharp shadows across the battered bulkheads. The multi-frequency klaxon continued its relentless assault on the eardrums, a synthetic scream designed to cut through sleep, fatigue, and the deep space silence. Captain Elias Vance did not flinch. He slammed his palm against the primary acoustic dampener, reducing the alarm to a manageable, rhythmic pulse, though the red strobes continued to spin furiously. "Talk to me, Kalen," Elias ordered, his voice dropping into the clipped, authoritative cadence of a man who had stared down the barrel of the cosmos more times than he cared to count. "Source? Proximity? Vector?" Kalen's crystalline fingers hovered over his console, moving with a blurring, inhuman speed that defied organic joint structures. A three-dimensional holographic map flared to life in the center of the bridge, suspended in midair. It depicted the immediate sector, filled with the scattered debris of the Sirius asteroid belt. "The distress beacon is originating from Sector 4G Alpha," Kalen reported, his voice as smooth and unperturbed as a placid lake. "Specifically, it is transmitting from deep within the Obsidian Veil." Elias frowned, leaning over the holographic projection. The Obsidian Veil was not merely a region of space. It was a navigational nightmare. It was a dense, highly volatile dark nebula, a churning cauldron of ionized gas, erratic gravitational eddies, and fierce, ship-shattering electromagnetic storms. It was a place where sensors went blind, navigation systems spun into gibberish, and holes were stripped down to the molecular level by radiation. "Patching in Chief Engineer Lyra," Elias said, tapping the comms relay. "Lyra, tell me you're awake down there." "I was in the middle of a beautiful REM cycle dreaming about a perfectly calibrated warp manifold, Captain," right until the ship started screaming. A gritty, heavily modulated female voice crackled through the speakers. Lyra was the Vagabond's mechanical heartbeat, a grease-stained, chronically sleep-deprived genius who kept the aging vessel flying entirely through spite, duct tape, and raw talent. "What's the disaster of the day?" "We've got a code, red pinging from inside the Obsidian Veil," Elias said. "Status of the deflector shields? They'll hold against the ambient radiation for maybe 20 minutes before we start cooking in our own suits," Lyra replied, the sound of heavy metal clanking echoing behind her words. "If we hit a localized ionic squall in there, those shields will pop like a soap bubble. Please tell me we're logging the beacon and forwarding it to an Alliance rescue cruiser." "Negative, Lyra," Kalen interjected, his blue energy streams pulsing methodically. "I have just managed to decrypt the telemetry of the distress signal. It does not belong to a Galactic Alliance vessel. Furthermore, an Alliance rescue cruiser would not respond to it, even if we relayed the coordinates." Elias narrowed his eyes, staring at the crystalline navigator. "Why? What's the ship's registry?" Kalen manipulated the hologram, isolating the signal's wave pattern. The projection shifted, forming the crude, jagged, brutalist silhouette of a massive star cruiser. It looked less like a ship and more like a floating fortress of jagged iron, designed not for aerodynamics, but for inflicting maximum blunt force trauma upon reality itself. "The signal signature is undeniably Garoth," Kalen stated flatly. A heavy silence descended upon the bridge, broken only by the rhythmic pulsing of the alarm. The Garoth Empire was the terror of the Outer Rim. They were a species of hulking, bipedal apex predators, naturally armored with thick, metallic scales and driven by a singular, unyielding philosophy. The weak perish, the strong conquer. They did not believe in diplomacy, they did not believe in trade, and they certainly did not believe in rescue missions. In the Garoth military doctrine, A ship that could not defend itself deserved to be destroyed. If a Garoth warrior sent a distress signal, it was not a plea for salvation. It was a final transmission of battle data before death. A Garoth dreadnought, Elias muttered, rubbing his scarred jaw. Correct, Captain, Kalen said. Currently, the Galactic Alliance is in a state of heavily armed Cold War with the Garoth Empire. By Alliance protocol, entering a hostile, lethal environment to aid an enemy combatant is classified as a Class A dereliction of logic. Probability of this being a trap, 87.4%. Probability of catastrophic vessel failure if we enter the Obsidian Veil, 92.1%. The mathematical conclusion is absolute. We must alter our vector and ignore the signal. And what is the probability of their survival if we leave them in there, Kalen? Elias asked quietly. Kalen didn't even need a microsecond to calculate. 0%. The nebula's electromagnetic shear will crush their hull integrity within the next solar hour. They are mathematically dead. Elias looked at the jagged hologram of the Garoth ship, then out at the blackness of space. He thought of the cold, sterile logic of the Alliance and the brutal, unforgiving supremacy of the Garoth. Both empires, despite their vast differences, shared one common trait. They looked at a dying crew and saw only numbers, protocols, and acceptable losses. Lyra, Elias said, his voice firm, leaving no room for debate. Divert all secondary power from life support, hydroponics, and the mess hall. Route everything you have into the forward deflector arrays and the structural integrity field. Overclock the thrusters. Captain, Lyra's voice held a note of genuine shock. Did you not just hear the walking calculator? It's a Garoth ship inside a cosmic meat grinder. If we go in there, we are practically begging the universe to turn us into space dust. I heard him, Elias replied, stepping up to the helm and taking manual control of the yoke. But Kalen is doing the math of the universe. We are humans. We do our own math. Captain Elias, I must officially protest this course of action, Kalen stated, his internal lights flashing in a rapid, agitated sequence. Your decision is driven by a completely irrational empathetic reflex. The Garoth would never do this for you. They would watch you burn and record the thermal data. I know, Elias said, gripping the control yoke, feeling the heavy, comforting vibration of the vagabond's engines spooling up beneath his boots. And if we leave them to die simply because they would leave us, then we are no better than they are. We don't save people because of who they are, Kalen. We save people because of who we are. Elias pushed the thrusters forward. The vagabond shuddered violently as it broke its orbital drift, the ancient engines screaming in protest as they were forced past their red line limits. May God have mercy on our beautifully stupid souls, Lyra muttered over the comms, followed by the sound of a wrench furiously striking a pipe. Power rerouted. Shields at 140%. If we die, I'm haunting you, Elias. Noted Chief Elias smirked. The small, battered, mathematically insignificant human vessel tore through the asteroid belt, leaving a trail of blue plasma in its wake. Ahead of them, the Obsidian Veil loomed, a massive, swirling wall of purple and black radiation, crackling with arcs of untamed stellar lightning. It was a graveyard of ships, a monument to the universe's hostility. Without a second moment of hesitation, the vagabond plunged directly into the abyss. Entering the Obsidian Veil was not akin to flying through a storm. It was like being swallowed alive by a cosmic deity of pure, unadulterated wrath. The moment the vagabond pierced the boundary of the dark nebula, the visual spectrum outside the viewport exploded into a terrifying, hallucinogenic display of violet and bruised purple luminescence. Gigantic arcs of stellar lightning, thick as skyscrapers, violently whipped through the ionized gas clouds, detonating with the force of localized supernovas. The auditory dampeners of the ship struggled and failed to filter out the deafening, bone-rattling roar of electromagnetic shear tearing against the hull. Inside the cockpit, The amber emergency lights flickered erratically as the ship's power grid fought to distribute Lyra's desperately overclocked energy output. The deck plates vibrated so fiercely that Elias could feel in his teeth. Sensors are entirely compromised, Kalen shouted, his synthesized voice forced to maximum volume to cut through the cacophony. His blue energy streams were flashing in a chaotic, strobe-like panic as his silicon brain tried to process the avalanche of contradictory telemetry. Magnetic interference is at 4,000% above baseline. Gravitational eddies are pulling at us from 12 distinct, mathematically impossible vectors. Captain, we are flying blind. We aren't blind, Kalen. We have a general heading. Elias roared back, wrestling with the manual control yoke. His forearms strained against the heavy, hydraulic feedback of the ship fighting the nebula's pull. Lyra, talk to me about those shields. They're screaming, Elias. Lyra's voice crackled over the heavy static of the comms, punctuated by a loud hiss of venting steam. The structural integrity field is holding at 62%, but the outer ablet of armor is already sloughing off like dead skin. We have maybe 7 minutes before the radiation cooks us in a human soup and turns Kalen into a very expensive glass paperweight. That's 6 minutes more than we need, Elias grunted, his eyes fixed on the churning purple maelstrom ahead. There, through a momentary break in the swirling, violently electrified gas, a silhouette emerged. It was a leviathan of the void. The Garoth dreadnought was a staggering testament to martial supremacy. Over 4 miles long, it was forged from dense, light-absorbing hyperalloys, designed with brutalist, aggressive geometries that looked less like a spacecraft and more like an armored spearhead meant to puncture planets. But right now, the great beast was dying. The obsidian veil was systematically dismantling it. Massive tectonic plates of armor were being ripped away by the gravitational shear, exposing the glowing, bleeding internal decks to the vacuum. Secondary explosions blossomed along its flanks like festering wounds. They have lost all primary engine function. Life support is failing across 90% of the vessel, Kalen reported, his optical sensors locking onto the dying behemoth. I am isolating the origin of the distress beacon. It is emanating from the command bridge, located in the heavily reinforced forward cranium of the ship. Match their rotation, Kalen, Elias ordered, his hands flying across the thruster controls. I'm going over. Kalen froze. Captain, I must reiterate, this is a Garoth warship. Even if there are survivors, they are genetically predisposed to hostility. A Garoth warrior views compassion as an insult. If you board that vessel, the statistical probability of you being executed by the very individual you are attempting to save is exceptionally high. Noted, Elias said, unbuckling his harness and standing up. Keep the engines warm. Lyra, prep the explosive docking umbilical. I'm putting on my EVA suit. You are an absolute lunatic, boss. Lyra's voice echoed from the engineering bay, though the rapid clacking of keys indicated she was already complying. Umbilical is primed. Try not to die. Finding a captain who lets me drink on the job is mathematically improbable. 3 minutes later, Elias stood in the primary airlock, sealed within a bulky, heavily armored extravehicular activity suit. He held a high-temperature plasma cutter in his right hand and a heavy magnetic grappling line in his left. With a violently jarring clang that reverberated through his entire skeleton, the vagabond's magnetic docking tube slammed into the damaged hull of the Garoth dreadnought, forcing a crude, pressurized seal. Elias hit the release valve. The airlock doors hissed open, and he stepped into the belly of the beast. The interior of the Garoth vessel was a nightmare landscape of zero gravity and flashing emergency strobes. The air was thick with the acrid stench of ozone, scorched circuitry, and the heavy, metallic copper scent of alien blood. Elias activated his suit's magnetic boots, anchoring himself to the tilted deck, and began to move forward through the labyrinth of twisted metal. He passed the bodies of fallen Garoth warriors. They were massive creatures, standing nearly 9 feet tall, their bodies covered in thick, interlocking biometallic scales. They had died not from the environment, but from the explosive decompression that had ruptured their internal organs. Even in death, their hands were rigidly gripped around their massive kinetic rifles. They had died trying to fight the nebula itself. Navigating by the flickering signal on his wrist-mounted locator, Elias finally forced open a heavy, buckled blast door and stepped onto the main command bridge. The bridge was completely decimated. Sparks rained down from the ceiling like a mechanical waterfall. At the center of the room, pinned beneath a colossal, fallen tactical pillar, was a single, breathing figure. Elias cautiously approached. The survivor was a Garoth commander, easily the largest of his kind Elias had ever seen. His scales were deep, bruised charcoal, and thick, neon-green blood pooled around him, floating upward in the zero-gravity environment like macabre bubbles. The commander's legs were crushed beneath the titanium pillar. Sensing movement, the Garoth commander slowly turned his massive, reptilian head. His eyes, glowing with a fierce, feral gold, locked onto the small, fragile human in the EVA suit. He did not ask for help. He did not plead. Instead, he bared a row of razor-sharp, serrated teeth. A scavenging, human rat, the commander rumbled, his voice a deep, guttural bass that vibrated through Elias's suit. He spoke the galactic common tongue with heavy, contemptuous disgust. Have you come to pick the bones of the mighty Vrax? Or are you here to gloat? Elias didn't respond. He stepped forward, assessing the fallen pillar. He activated his plasma cutter, the bright blue blade humming to life. Vrax snarled, struggling weakly against the crushing weight. Do not touch me, you soft, shell-less anomaly. My ship has fallen in glorious battle against the cosmos. I am Commander Vrax of the 7th Fleet. I am a warrior of the Garoth. I demand to be left here to die with honor. I will not be a charity case for a weakling species. Elias looked down at the hulking alien. He deactivated his helmet's external speaker, keeping his voice strictly on his internal comms to Kalen and Lyra. Kalen, I've got him. He's very large, very angry, and demanding a glorious death. The most logical course of action is to oblige his request and return immediately. Captain, Kalen replied evenly. Elias turned his external speakers back on. He knelt down so that his faceplate was inches from the Garoth commander's terrifying maw. Listen to me very carefully, Vrax, Elias said, his voice cold, steady, and entirely devoid of fear. On my ship, you don't get to choose how you die. You want to die with honor? Fine. But you're going to do it after I drag your oversized, scaly carcass out of this radioactive garbage disposal. Now, shut up and brace yourself. This is going to hurt. Before Vrax could protest, Elias plunged the plasma cutter into the joint of the titanium pillar. The metal shrieked as the intense heat melted the locking mechanisms. With a massive heave, Elias engaged the hydraulic servos in his EVA suit, pushing the agonizingly heavy pillar just high enough. Now move, Elias roared. Vrax, driven by sheer, ingrained survival instinct despite his death wish, dragged his crushed lower half out from under the debris. Elias immediately hooked the magnetic grappling line onto Vrax's heavy breastplate. The hull is fracturing, Elias. Lyra screamed over the comms. The veil just tore off their port nacelle. We are losing the umbilical seal. You have 60 seconds. Hold the line, Lyra. Elias grabbed Vrax by his shoulder plating. The Garoth was incredibly heavy, even in zero gravity, but Elias hauled him toward the exit with a frantic, desperate strength born of pure adrenaline. Behind them, the dreadnought began to groan, a deeply unsettling sound of catastrophic structural failure. The bridge collapsed inward, consumed by the crushing pressure of the nebula. Elias practically threw the massive alien into the docking tube, diving in right after him just as the seal ripped away. Punch it, Lyra. Punch it now. Elias screamed as the airlock doors slammed shut. The vagabond shrieked as its thrusters ignited, tearing away from the Garoth dreadnought just milliseconds before the massive warship imploded, consumed entirely by the violet fury of the obsidian veil. As the small human vessel shot out into the dark, relatively calm space beyond the nebula, Elias lay panting on the floor of the airlock. Beside him, Commander Vrax lay bleeding, staring at the ceiling in absolute, stunned silence. A fragile, tiny human had just defied the universe, defied logic, and defied a Garoth warrior's pride, all out of sheer, stubborn empathy. Consciousness returned to Commander Vrax, not as a gentle awakening, but as a violent, jarring collision of sensory input. In the Garoth Empire, the medical wards were vast, cavernous halls of gleaming black obsidian, where automated surgical drones tended to the wounded in absolute silence. Pain was managed through neurosuppression. Healing was a brutal, efficient biological imperative. Here, however, Vrax awoke to the overwhelming stench of harsh chemical antiseptics, burning ozone, and the distinct, incredibly annoying sound of a heavily synthesized pop music track blaring from a portable speaker. He opened his golden, reptilian eyes. He was lying on a metal examination table that was laughably inadequate for his massive frame. His heavily scaled legs hung off the edge from the knees down, suspended in a pair of crudely welded metal stirrups. The room was no larger than a storage closet, bathed in stark, unforgiving white light. And standing over him, humming along to the obnoxious music, was the human female. Lyra wore a heavily stained mechanic's jumpsuit. Her face was smeared with engine grease, and her hair was tied back in a messy, chaotic knot. She was currently operating a handheld device that looked suspiciously like an industrial-grade plasma torch modified, with a medical staple gun attachment. Vrax tried to rise, a low, threatening rumble vibrating deep within his chest. Where am I? Where are my weapons? Whoa, easy there, Godzilla, Lyra said, pressing a shockingly strong hand against his chest plating and shoving him back down. For a creature so small and fragile, lacking any natural exoskeleton or muscle density, her leverage was surprisingly effective. You're in the Vagabond's medbay. And by medbay, I mean the secondary cargo hold I scrubbed down with bleach 20 minutes ago. Don't move. I'm currently trying to fuse your shattered fibula together before you bleed out all over my nice, clean deck. Vrax looked down. Both of his legs were wrapped in a bizarre, multi-layered cocoon of medical gauze, splints fabricated for what appeared to be scavenged hull plating and copious amounts of shiny, silver adhesive tape. What is this atrocity? Vrax snarled, pointing a massive, clawed finger at the silver tape. This is not medical-grade coagulant. This is an insult. You are patching the commander of the 7th Fleet together with debris. That, my oversized friend, is duct tape, Lyra replied, entirely unfazed by his anger. She fired the staple gun into a gash on his thigh, causing Vrax to hiss through his teeth. It holds the universe together. It's currently holding you together. Your internal regenerative capabilities are impressive, I'll give you that. Any human would have been pulverized by that titanium pillar. But you still lost about 3 liters of that glowing green stuff you call blood. So, lie still, shut up, and let me work, or I swear to the void I will sedate you with a horse tranquilizer. Before Vrax could formulate a proper threat, detailing exactly how he would dismantle her atom by atom, the door hissed open. Captain Elias walked in, holding a steaming mug in one hand and a datapad in the other. He looked exhausted, his face lined with the deep fatigue of the adrenaline crash that inevitably followed surviving the obsidian veil. Behind him floated Kalen, his blue energy streams pulsing in a steady, calming rhythm. I see our guest is awake, Elias said, leaning against the doorframe. How was the patient, Doc? I'm an engineer, Elias, not a doctor, Lyra corrected without looking up from her makeshift surgery. But functionally, he's a tank. Structural integrity is compromised, but the main engine is still running. Give him a week, and he'll be back to conquering planets, or whatever it is his people do for fun. Vrax glared at Elias. This was the male who had dragged him from the wreckage. The captain looked even smaller and more fragile without the bulky EVA suit. You, Vrax rumbled, the word dripping with venom. Explain yourself, human. Why did you intervene? I was prepared to die a warrior's death. You stole that from me. Elias took a sip from his mug. You're welcome. Vrax's eyes narrowed. I'm not expressing gratitude. I am demanding a strategic justification. The Galactic Alliance considers my kind an existential threat. They would have watched my dreadnought burn and logged the statistical data. Why did you, a supposedly inferior species, risk your own vessel to extract an enemy combatant? To be perfectly accurate, Kalen interjected smoothly, hovering closer to the examination table. I strongly advise the captain against this course of action. You represent a massive drain on our limited resources. You are consuming 400% more oxygen than a standard crew member. Furthermore, your presence aboard this vessel increases the probability of a hostile boarding action by Alliance patrols by 63.8%. Your extraction was a statistical anomaly driven by irrational human empathy. Vrax looked at the crystalline entity, nodding slowly. The machine speaks the truth. Logic dictates that the weak perish and the strong survive. My ship failed. I failed. My life was forfeit. By saving me, you have violated the natural order of the cosmos. Elias sighed, setting his mug down on a nearby tray. He walked over to the table, completely ignoring the fact that Vrax could snap his neck with a single, quick motion. The natural order of the cosmos is cold, Vrax. It's dead, Elias said softly, looking directly into the Garotha's glowing eyes. Its rocks smashing into other rocks. Its stars burning out. It doesn't care about honor, and it certainly doesn't care about your pride. Elias pointed a finger at Vrax's chest. You Garoth think you're the apex predators of the galaxy because you have thick scales and big guns. But humanity didn't survive our death world by being the strongest. We didn't have armor. We didn't have claws. We were soft, slow, and entirely vulnerable. Vrax scoffed. Then how did you not go extinct? Because we formed packs, Elias answered, his voice firming with an ancient, deeply ingrained conviction. When the winter came, we huddled together for warmth. When the predators attacked, we stood shoulder to shoulder. If one of us broke a leg, the pack didn't leave them behind to die with honor. We carried them. We healed them. We protected the weak until they could be strong again. Elias leaned in closer. That's what makes us dangerous, Vrax. We don't view a broken ally as a liability. We view them as a reason to fight harder. And out here, in the deep black, where the universe is actively trying to kill us every single second of every single day, anyone who is breathing is part of the pack. Vrax fell silent. His mind, conditioned by centuries of brutal Garoth military doctrine, struggled to process the concept. He looked at Lyra, who was currently wrapping a final layer of duct tape around his splint, her face set in a mask of intense concentration. He looked at Kalen, a creature of pure logic who clearly disagreed with his own captain, yet remained loyal. And finally, he looked at Elias, a man who had looked death in the eyes simply to pull a stranger from the fire. You humans, Vrax finally murmured, leaning his heavy head back against the metal table. You are not an anomaly. You are infection, a dangerous, persistent infection that defies the cure of logic. Yeah, well, Lyra smirked, wiping her greasy hands on a towel. We grow on you. Now drink this. It tastes like battery acid, but it'll stop the infection in your leg. She shoved a small cup of cloudy liquid into his massive hand. Vrax looked at it, then at the humans, and, for the first time in his life, the fearsome commander of the 7th Fleet did exactly as he was told. The vagabond was not flying. It was limping through the cosmos like a wounded animal desperately trying to find a quiet place to heal. Surviving the Obsidian Veil had pushed the aging exploration vessel far beyond its theoretical tolerances. The port-side hull plating looked as though it had been subjected to a massive, cosmic cheese grater. The primary impulse engines were offline, leaving the ship relying on secondary thrusters that coughed out uneven, sputtering bursts of blue plasma. Inside the ship, the life support system hummed with an agonizing, high-pitched whine, struggling to scrub the ambient radiation from the recycled air. In the lower engineering deck, Commander Vrax lumbered through the narrow corridors. He was utilizing a thick, reinforced titanium strut, scavenged from a ruptured bulkhead, as a makeshift walking cane. Every step sent a jolt of dull pain up his heavily bandaged legs. But the sheer humiliation of remaining bedridden in a closet-sized medical bay had finally overridden his physical discomfort. He found Lyra waist-deep in a tangled mass of fiber-optic cables and smoking circuitry beneath the main warp core housing. She was holding a flashlight in her teeth and cursing fluently in 3 different terrestrial languages. "Your vessel is structurally compromised," Vrax stated, his deep voice echoing in the metallic space. In the Garoth Imperial Fleet, a ship suffering this level of catastrophic degradation would be immediately scuttled. It is highly inefficient to expend resources attempting to repair a machine that is statistically more likely to fail than succeed. Lyra spat the flashlight out of her mouth, wiping a fresh streak of black grease across her forehead. She looked up at the towering alien, utterly unimpressed. "Well, in the human fleet, we have this magical concept called being broke," she shot back, grabbing a roll of electrical tape and aggressively wrapping it around a frayed conduit. "We don't have the luxury of tossing a ship into the nearest sun just because she's got a few dents. The vagabond has character. She's stubborn. We understand each other. You anthropomorphize a machine," Vrax rumbled, leaning heavily on his titanium cane. "That is a severe cognitive flaw. It cannot love you back. It will not mourn you when it inevitably detonates." Before Lyra could formulate a suitably biting retort, the ship-wide intercom crackled to life. Elias's voice, tight with renewed tension, cut through the ambient noise of the failing engines. "Lyra, Vrax, get up to the bridge. Now, we have a problem, and it isn't mechanical." When Vrax and Lyra reached the command deck, the red emergency strobes were mercifully off, but the atmosphere was suffocatingly thick. Kalen was standing frozen at his console, his blue internal energy streams dimming to a pale, anxious cyan. On the main viewport, suspended against the backdrop of distant stars, hung a Galactic Alliance Enforcer-class cruiser. It was a terrifyingly beautiful machine. Unlike the brutalist, jagged architecture of the Garoth dreadnoughts or the scrappy, utilitarian design of the human ship, the Alliance cruiser was a masterpiece of sterile perfection. It was shaped like an elongated teardrop of pristine white metamaterial, completely devoid of visible seams, weapons ports, or exhaust vents. It radiated an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. "Alliance cruiser Axiom," Kalen reported, his synthesized voice quieter than usual. "They dropped out of slipspace intercept vector precisely 3.4 seconds ago. They have already initiated a deep penetration bioscan of our vessel. They are actively overriding our communication firewall." The central holographic projector flared to life, not with a tactical map, but with the projection of an Alliance commander. It was a Volaris, an avian-descended species with striking plumage of silver and gold, sharp predatory eyes, and an expression of cold, imperious disdain. "Earth vessel vagabond," the Volaris commander spoke, its voice carrying the translated, clipped precision of Alliance law. "I am Commander Xyler of the Galactic Vanguard. Our long-range telemetry detected your unauthorized entry and exit from the Obsidian Veil. Furthermore, our bioscans indicate you are currently harboring a Class 1 biological threat. You have a Garoth combatant aboard." Elias stepped into the projection's field of view, crossing his arms casually, though his jaw was clenched tight. "Commander Xyler, the Garoth in question is an unarmed, severely wounded survivor of a shipwreck. We provided emergency medical assistance under the Universal Maritime Salvage Laws. The Garoth Empire is not a signatory of the Universal Maritime Salvage Laws," Xyler countered smoothly, entirely unmoved. "They're classified as a hostile, predatory species. By harboring an enemy combatant, you are in direct violation of Alliance Directive 4B. Power down your engines and prepare for immediate boarding. The Garoth asset will be confiscated, interrogated for fleet telemetry, and subsequently terminated. You have exactly 1 standard minute to comply, or we will disable your vessel by force." The hologram abruptly cut out. Silence descended upon the vagabond. Kalen immediately began running the numbers. Captain, Kalen said, the Axiom possesses class, 8 plasma batteries, and an impenetrable kinetic shielding array. Our weapons are offline. Our shields are at 12%. The statistical probability of surviving a direct confrontation is precisely 0.0001%. Logic dictates immediate surrender. Vrax stepped forward, his heavy boots clanking against the deck plates. He looked at Elias, then at the viewport. The machine is correct, Vrax said, his voice stripped of its usual hostility, replaced by a grim, fatalistic resignation. The Alliance will destroy this ship without a second thought. You have proven your bizarre, irrational point, human. You pull me from the fire, but I will not allow your pack to be slaughtered because of me. Open the airlock. I will surrender myself to the Axiom. It was a stunning admission from a species that viewed surrender as the ultimate disgrace. Vrax was offering his own life and his own honor to save the very creatures he had called rats just hours ago. Elias looked at the towering alien, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his scarred face. Sit down, Vrax, Elias said quietly. You're a guest on this ship, and on this ship, we don't hand our guests over to the firing squad just because a glowing bird told us to. Elias, you cannot fight them. Vrax roared, genuinely confused. It is suicide. Who said anything about fighting? Elias spun toward Lyra. Chief, the impulse engines are shot, but what about the warp core? If we dump the remaining antimatter reserves directly into the containment field without cycling it through the regulators, what happens? Lyra's eyes went wide as the sheer insanity of the captain's plan dawned on her. If we dump the raw reserves, the core will temporarily spike to 400% capacity. It'll generate an electromagnetic pulse so massive it'll look like a dying star on their sensors. But it will also fry our own navigational relays. We'll be shot blindly into slip space. We could end up inside a sun. Can you do it in 40 seconds? Elias demanded. I can do it in 30 if I bypass the safety protocols with a literal crowbar. Lyra yelled, already sprinting back toward the engineering bay. Elias turned to Kalen. Kalen, calculate a blind vector. Anywhere. Just point us away from that cruiser. A blind jump is statistical suicide. Kalen protested, his lights flashing frantically. Do it anyway. That is a direct order. Outside, the Alliance cruiser began to charge its forward plasma batteries. The vacuum of space seemed to hold its breath. 10 seconds. Lyra screamed over the comms. Core is destabilizing. We are redlining. Hold on to something. Elias shouted. At the exact moment the Alliance cruiser fired its disabling shot, Lyra slammed a literal metal crowbar into the manual override of the warp core. The Vagabond did not just accelerate. It violently detonated an EMP of raw, unrefined subspace energy. The resulting shockwave instantly blinded the Axiom's highly advanced, hypersensitive sensor arrays, rendering the multi-billion credit warship entirely blind and deaf for 3 crucial seconds. In that microsecond of chaos, the tiny, broken human ship tore a ragged hole in the fabric of space and vanished, leaving the perfect, logical Alliance cruiser shooting at empty air. When the Vagabond crashed back into normal space, violently shaking, sparking, and drifting in an entirely unknown sector of the galaxy, Vrax was clutching the navigation console to keep from falling. He stared at Elias, who was currently laughing out loud, a sound of pure, adrenaline-fueled relief. You defied the Galactic Alliance, Vrax whispered, awestruck. You defied logic, statistics, and certain death. Why? Why would you go to such absurd lengths for an enemy? Elias wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and looked at the Garoth commander. Because, Vrax, Elias smiled. Once you bleed on my deck, you aren't an enemy anymore. You're a problem, and nobody touches our problems. The transition from the chaotic, blinding violence of a blind slip space jump to the absolute, suffocating stillness of uncharted space was not graceful. It felt as though the Vagabond had been violently chewed up by a cosmic leviathan and abruptly spat out into a pitch-black abyss. The ship slammed into normal space with a teeth-rattling shudder that threw everyone to the deck. The artificial gravity generators whined in protest, briefly fluctuating so that the crew floated an inch off the floor before being slammed back down. Then, everything went dead. The primary lights, the hum of the ventilation, the comforting vibration of the engines. All of it ceased. Only the pale, ghostly glow of emergency chemical lights illuminated the bridge. The silence was absolute, heavy, and profound. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the eardrums, a stark reminder that only a few inches of battered metal separated them from the absolute zero of the void. "Status," Elias rasped, pulling himself up from the deck, his hand clutching a bruised rib. Kalen's internal bioenergy streams, usually a bright, steady blue, were now flickering weakly, indicating a severe drain on his own power reserves as he interfaced with the dead console. "Main power is entirely offline," Kalen reported, his synthesized voice dropping in pitch due to the low voltage. "We are operating purely on emergency chemical batteries. Life support is at minimum viable capacity. The warp core has successfully emergency vented, but the induction coils are fused into solid slag. We are effectively immobilized. And our location?" Elias asked, staring out the viewport at a starfield that looked entirely alien. "The constellations were wrong. The nebulae were the wrong colors. I'm attempting to cross-reference our stellar positioning with the Galactic Alliance navigational database," Kalen said, his optical sensors whirring. A moment later, he stopped. "Captain, there is no match. We are completely off the galactic map. We have jumped beyond the charted borders of the outer rim into the unknown regions. We are, by every statistical metric, profoundly and irreversibly lost. In the Garoth Empire, being lost was considered a tactical failure punishable by death. To step into the unknown without a mathematically sound extraction plan was the height of foolishness." Commander Vrax, leaning heavily on his titanium strut in the shadows of the bridge, felt a cold dread settle in his primary stomachs. He had survived the Obsidian Veil. He had survived the Alliance cruiser, only to slowly asphyxiate in a dark, forgotten corner of the universe. He looked at Elias, expecting to see the human captain gripped by the same existential terror. Instead, Elias simply sighed, ran a hand through his graying hair, and tapped his comms earpiece. "Lyra, tell me you're alive." Static hissed for a long, agonizing moment before Lyra's voice coughed through the speaker. "Alive? Technically. Furious? Absolutely. You owe me a new warp core, Elias. And a bottle of synthetic bourbon. A really big one. Put on my tab." Elias smiled faintly. "Can you give us thrusters? Just enough to maneuver." "Give me 20 minutes and a roll of copper wire," Lyra grunted. "But Elias, don't expect miracles. We are dead in the water. We have no FTL capabilities. If we are where Kalen says we are, it would take us 40,000 years to fly back to Alliance space on sublight engines." "Understood," Elias said calmly. He turned off the comms and leaned against the dead navigation console. Vrax could not comprehend the sheer, baffling serenity of the human. "You do not understand the gravity of this situation," the Garoth commander rumbled. "We are stranded in the dark. There are no supply lines. There are no rescue beacons. We will freeze, and then we will starve. Your defiance against the Alliance has merely delayed our execution." Elias looked up at the towering alien. "Vrax, my ancestors used to cross raging, uncharted oceans in wooden boats held together by tree sap and rope, navigating by nothing but the stars and a sheer, stubborn refusal to sink. Being lost isn't a death sentence for humanity. It's an occupational hazard." Suddenly, Kalen's console emitted a sharp, singular ping. "Correction," Kalen stated, his lights flaring. "I have detected a localized gravitational anomaly. It is not generating a thermal signature, nor is it reflecting light, which is why visual sensors missed it, but it possesses a mass equivalent to a small moon. We are drifting directly into its gravitational pull." Elias pushed himself off the console. "Put on the screen. Enhance visual using ambient starlight amplification." The dark viewport flickered as the ship's optical sensors strained to gather whatever stray photons were drifting through the void. Slowly, a massive silhouette emerged from the absolute blackness. It was a megastructure. It was an unimaginably colossal ring forged from a strange, dark metal that seemed to actively absorb the starlight around it. It dwarfed the Vagabond, large enough to comfortably fit a dozen Alliance cruisers side by side through its center. The surface of the ring was etched with massive, intricate geometric patterns that defied any known architectural logic. It was ancient, dormant, and utterly silent. By the ancestors, Vrax whispered, his golden eyes wide with genuine awe. It is a precursor construct. The Alliance scholars claimed they were myths, fairy tales designed to frighten younglings. What is it? Elias asked. It is a hypergate, Kalen answered, his voice devoid of its usual certainty. Theoretical physics suggests the precursors used them to fold space, traveling instantaneously between galaxies, not just star systems. However, this structure has been mathematically dead for at least 2 billion years. It possesses no power source. Elias stared at the colossal, dead ring. A familiar, dangerous spark ignited in his eyes. It was the look of a human who had just seen a challenge the universe had deemed impossible. It doesn't have a power source, Elias murmured, turning toward the comms. Lyra, how much raw voltage is left in our fused warp core? Not enough to jump us, but enough to vent. If I bypass the safety regulators and short-circuit the primary capacitors, I can give you one massive, catastrophic surge, Lyra answered, catching his drift instantly. It'll fry every remaining circuit on this ship. We'll be left with nothing but manual life support. Why? Because, Elias grinned, a feral, uniquely human expression of pure audacity. We're going to use the Vagabond as a jumper cable. We're going to hotwire a 2-billion-year-old alien megastructure. Vrax stared at the human captain, his jaw slightly open. That is not a tactical maneuver. That is the definition of madness. If the frequency does not match, the backlash will vaporize us down to our constituent atoms. Only if we miss the receptor port, Elias said, pointing to a massive, slightly recessed trench along the inner rim of the ancient gate. Lyra, route all emergency battery power to the manual maneuvering thrusters. Kalen, calculate the exact trajectory to wedge us into that trench. Probability of success is... Kalen paused, his internal processors working overtime. I cannot calculate it. The variables are entirely unknown. Good, Elias said, taking hold of the manual flight yoke, feeling the heavy, sluggish response of the dying ship. I hate knowing the odds anyway. Brace for impact, gentlemen. We're about to knock on the door of the gods. The tiny, battered human ship flared its weak thrusters, altering its drift, and began to accelerate directly toward the dark, ancient heart of the dormant ring, carrying with it a crew of misfits and a sheer, terrifying brand of hope. The dormant precursor hypergate loomed ahead, a titan of forgotten antiquity suspended in the breathless dark. As the Vagabond drifted closer, the true, mind-numbing scale of the megastructure became violently apparent. The human vessel, which had weathered plasma storms, asteroid fields, and the crushing gravity of the obsidian veil, was reduced to the size of a solitary speck of dust floating toward the gaping maw of a leviathan. The dark metal of the ring did not reflect the Vagabond's weak, flickering thruster light. It seemed to actively devour it, drinking in the photons with an insatiable 2-billion-year-old thirst. Along the inner circumference, the massive receptor trench, Elias's intended target, was a jagged canyon of sheer, brutalist geometry. Proximity alert, Kalen announced, his synthesized voice sounding strangely hollow in the dimly lit bridge. His internal energy streams were barely a whisper of cyan now, conserving every microvolt. We are 2,000 meters from the primary trench. Velocity is 30 meters per second. Captain, I must reiterate that the geometric tolerances of the trench are unknown. If we strike the edge at this angle, the kinetic transfer will instantly shatter our primary keel. Then I guess we won't strike the edge, Elias grunted, his hands white-knuckling the manual flight yoke. He wasn't flying with sensors or predictive algorithms anymore. He was flying by the seat of his pants, feeling the sluggish, agonizingly slow response of the ship through the soles of his boots and the vibrations in his palms. It was a chaotic, instinctual method of piloting that made Kalen's logic circuits physically ache. Behind Elias, Commander Vrax stood rigid, his massive hands gripping the back of the co-pilot's chair. The Garoth warrior had spent his entire life adhering to a strict, militaristic doctrine where every maneuver was calculated for maximum lethal efficiency. To plunge headlong into a dead, alien artifact on the wild assumption that it could be hotwired, like a stolen hoverbike, was beyond comprehension. Yet, as he watched the gray-haired human captain stare down the abyss with a manic, unyielding grin, Vrax felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation welling up in his chest. It wasn't fear. It was profound, genuine respect. 500 meters, Kalen reported. Lyra, Elias barked into the comms. Are those capacitors primed? Primed, bypassed, and currently held together by a literal prayer and my last roll of electrical tape. Lyra's voice cracked over the heavy static. Elias, when I pull this lever, every single circuit on this ship is going to fry. Life support, artificial gravity, emergency lights, everything. We will have exactly 3 minutes of residual oxygen before we suffocate in the dark. This had better work. It'll work, Elias lied smoothly. Stand by. 100 meters, Kalen said. Impact in 3, 2. Brace, Elias roared. The vagabond slammed into the precursor trench. The sound of the impact was apocalyptic, a deafening, agonizing shriek of tearing metal that reverberated through the marrow of everyone aboard. The ship violently pitched upwards, scraping along the sheer walls of the ancient canyon. Sparks rained across the viewport in blinding sheets. The deck plates buckled, groaning under the immense kinetic stress. Vrax was thrown to his knees, his massive frame slamming hard against the bulkhead. Kalen's console shattered in a shower of useless glass and dead circuitry. Now, Lyra, hit it, Elias screamed over the din of the dying ship. Deep in the engineering bay, Lyra slammed her entire body weight against the manual release lever. The fused warp core, bloated with unrefined, highly volatile antimatter energy, violently purged its entire payload in a single, catastrophic microsecond. The vagabond acted as a massive, conductive needle, injecting a blinding surge of raw voltage directly into the conductive metal of the precursor trench. Inside the ship, every remaining light bulb shattered simultaneously. The hum of the life support violently spun down into silence. The artificial gravity failed instantly, sending loose debris, datapads, and Elias's chipped coffee mug floating weightlessly into the pitch-black air. Then, the universe held its breath. For 10 agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the crew's own panicked breathing in the suffocating dark. Vrax closed his eyes, preparing his mind for the cold embrace of the void. Kalen's internal lights faded to a microscopic pinprick. Elias gripped the dead yoke, his heart hammering against his bruised ribs. It didn't work, Elias thought, a cold knot of dread finally settling in his stomach. I just killed us all. But then a sound began to build. It was not a mechanical hum, nor was it the roar of plasma engines. It was a deep, resonant, harmonic vibration that seemed to emanate not from the structure, but from the fabric of space itself. It vibrated through the hull of the dead human ship, vibrating through the bones of the crew. Outside the viewport, the darkness shattered. Deep within the microscopic grooves of the ancient metal, veins of pure, incandescent gold began to ignite. The light spread with viral speed, racing along the colossal geometric patterns that covered the surface of the hypergate. The 2-billion-year-old machine was waking up, drinking the crude, chaotic spark of human energy and transmuting it into something divine. Captain, Kalen whispered in the dark, his visual sensors overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the energy signature. The structure, it is generating a localized singularity. A stable Einstein-Rosen bridge. The center of the massive ring tore open. It did not create a violent, chaotic, swirling vortex like a standard slipspace jump. Instead, it opened a perfectly smooth, circular window of blinding, pure white light. It was a doorway to another reality. Before Elias could utter a word, the gravitational pull of the awakened gate latched onto the vagabond. With a violent, frictionless lurch, the dead, battered human vessel was swallowed by the light. The transition was instantaneous and entirely silent. There was no sensation of movement, no crushing G-force. One moment they were surrounded by the hostile, freezing black of the unknown regions, and the next they were gently expelled into a place of impossible beauty. The blinding white light faded, revealing a star system unlike anything recorded in the Galactic Alliance archives. The vagabond drifted slowly, entirely dead, caught in the gentle gravitational embrace of a lush, emerald-green nebula that glowed with a warm, ambient luminescence. In the center of the nebula hung a single golden star. And orbiting that star was not a planet, but a sprawling, planetary-scaled artificial habitat, a Dyson ring covered in vast, sprawling oceans, silver continents, and ancient, towering spires that reached up toward the cosmos. It was perfectly preserved, a dormant sanctuary untouched by the wars, politics, and cold logic of the modern galaxy. Elias unbuckled his harness and floated upward in the zero-gravity environment of the bridge, pushing himself gently toward the viewport. Vrax floated beside him, his golden eyes wide with an emotion that transcended his warrior conditioning. Even Kalen drifted closer, his internal lights flickering back to life as the ambient energy of the sanctuary slowly recharged his crystalline cells. "We are alive," Kalen stating the obvious fact, as if it were the most profoundly illogical equation he had ever solved. "Where are we?" Vrax breathed, staring at the emerald nebula and the golden ring. "I don't know." Elias smiled, a quiet, awestruck expression crossing his scarred face. The ship was dead. They had no comms, no weapons, and a few minutes of air left. But they had achieved the impossible. But I think we just found the place where the gods went to sleep. Down in the engineering bay, a single, manual comms line crackled to life, powered by a handheld battery pack. "Hey, Bridge." Lyra's voice echoed, breathless and trembling. "I don't know what you just did, but the view down here is spectacular. Are we dead?" "No, Lyra," Elias replied softly. "We just woke up." The euphoria of their miraculous salvation was incredibly short-lived, brutally cut short by the burning, undeniable reality of their own biology. The vagabond was floating silently in the gravitational embrace of the golden star and its breathtaking Dyson ring, bathed in the soft, emerald light of the surrounding nebula. It was a vista of unimaginable, divine beauty. But inside the pitch-black cockpit of the dead human vessel, the air was rapidly turning into a toxic, suffocating soup. Without the life support scrubbers functioning, the carbon dioxide levels in the confined space of the ship were spiking at an alarming rate. Elias could feel the cold, creeping lethargy seeping into his muscles. His breaths became shallow and rapid, his lungs burning as they desperately searched for oxygen molecules that were no longer there. Next to him, floating in the zero-gravity darkness, Commander Vrax was faring much worse. The massive Garoth required 4 times the oxygen of a human. His deep, rumbling breaths had turned into harsh, wet wheezes, his golden eyes dimming as his mighty, warrior's heart struggled to pump unoxygenated blood through his colossal frame. Only Kalen remained physically unaffected, though his internal energy streams were barely a whisper of pale cyan. "Captain," Kalen's voice crackled, the synthesizer struggling without sufficient power. "Ambient oxygen levels have dropped below 11%. Hypoxia is setting in. We have approximately 4 minutes before irreversible brain damage occurs, followed shortly by biological cessation." From the open hatchway leading down to the engineering deck, Lyra pulled herself into the bridge. She was gasping, her face pale beneath the smears of engine grease. Elias, she coughed, gripping a handhold to anchor herself. Tell me there's air out there. Elias forced his heavy, oxygen-starved brain to focus. He pushed himself toward the viewport, staring out at the colossal, silver and gold architecture of the Dyson ring below them. They were drifting directly toward what looked like a massive, open-air docking plaza, surrounded by towering spires of crystalline glass and lush, silver vegetation that seemed to thrive in the vacuum of the nebula. Kalen, Elias rasped, his voice barely a whisper. The ring. Does it have an atmosphere? Kalen's optical sensors whirred, focusing on the approaching structure. I am detecting a localized atmospheric containment field surrounding the ring's inner surface. Composition: 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. It is perfectly breathable, but we are sealed inside a dead ship. The airlocks require electrical power to cycle. Not all of them, Elias panted. He turned his head, his vision beginning to blur at the edges. Vrax, the Garoth commander grunted, a sound of profound exhaustion. The main cargo hatch, Elias breathed, pointing a trembling finger toward the lower decks. It has a manual hydraulic override, an emergency crank. It takes 2 men to turn it under normal gravity. Vrax understood. He did not waste breath on words. The giant alien pushed himself off the bulkhead, propelling his massive, battered body down the corridor toward the cargo hold, moving with the desperate, thrashing urgency of a drowning man. Elias and Lyra followed, pulling themselves along the handholds, their vision tunneling into a single, desperate point of focus. When they reached the cargo bay, Vrax had already found the heavy, red-painted manual override wheel set into the reinforced bulkhead. It was a crude, brutal piece of mechanical engineering designed for catastrophic failures exactly like this. Vrax gripped the wheel with both of his massive, clawed hands. His muscles, thick as steel cables, bulged against his scales. He let out a primal, guttural roar that echoed in the dying ship, and he wrenched the wheel. With an agonizing shriek of unlubricated metal, the heavy locking pins disengaged. "Hold on," Elias yelled, grabbing Lyra by her jumpsuit and hooking his arm through a heavy cargo tie-down ring. Vrax gave the wheel one final, violently powerful heave. The cargo doors cracked open. The pressure difference was instantaneous and explosive. The remaining toxic, stale air inside the vagabond violently depressurized, blowing the massive doors wide open and sucking the crew forward. They were violently expelled from the belly of their dead ship, tumbling out into the void. But there was no crushing vacuum. There was no freezing death. Instead, they fell gracefully through an invisible, shimmering barrier of energy, and suddenly, gravity reasserted itself. They plummeted a short 20 feet before crashing into a thick, soft bed of silver-bladed grass. Elias lay on his back, staring up at the golden star overhead, and took a breath. The air rushed into his lungs like liquid crystal. It was cool, sweet, and unbelievably pure, carrying the faint, intoxicating scent of ozone and blooming flowers. It was the taste of absolute salvation. Beside him, Lyra was coughing violently, tears streaming down her soot-stained face as she greedily gulped the air. A few yards away, Commander Vrax lay sprawled in the alien grass, his massive chest heaving, his golden eyes wide with the sheer, unbelievable shock of being alive. Kalen drifted down gracefully a moment later, his anti-gravity thrusters engaging automatically. He landed softly beside Elias. "Atmospheric composition is optimal," Kalen reported, looking around at the surreal landscape. "Temperature is a constant 22 degrees Celsius. There are no pathogens, no toxins, no harmful radiation. This environment, it is mathematically perfect." Elias slowly pushed himself up to a sitting position. He looked around. They had landed in the center of a sprawling, magnificent plaza. The ground was paved with smooth, seamless white stone that felt warm to the touch. Surrounding the plaza were towering architectural marvels, buildings that looked as though they had been grown rather than built, spiraling up toward the heavens in elegant, sweeping curves of silver and glass. Lush gardens of bioluminescent flora grew in perfect, harmonious symmetry. It was a utopia, a paradise forged by the hands of gods. But as the ringing in Elias's ears faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of the silver grass in a soft breeze, a profound, unsettling realization washed over him. "Listen," Elias whispered, standing up slowly. Vrax and Lyra pushed themselves up, looking around with a sudden, tense wariness. The Garoth warrior instinctively reached for a weapon that was no longer at his hip. "I hear nothing," Vrax rumbled. "Exactly," Elias said. There was no hum of machinery. There was no distant roar of engines. There were no voices, no footsteps, no signs of commerce or conflict or life. The Dyson Ring, despite its pristine condition and breathable atmosphere, was a ghost town. It was a perfectly preserved monument suspended in time. "Where is everyone?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling slightly in the absolute silence. A structure this size, it could hold trillions of lives. But there's nothing. Kalen walked toward a beautifully carved pedestal in the center of the plaza. As his crystalline hand hovered over the smooth stone, the pedestal reacted to his bioenergy. A soft, blue holographic projection flared to life, filling the air with complex, flowing alien script that Kalen's deep-core linguistic algorithms immediately began to decipher. "This is not a colony," Kalen said, his synthesized voice dropping in pitch as he processed the ancient data. "This is a mausoleum, a tomb," Vrax asked, his brow furrowing. "Who defeated them? I see no signs of orbital bombardment, no scorch marks of plasma weapons. What enemy could vanquish the builders of such a place?" "No one," Kalen replied, turning to face the crew. The blue light of the hologram reflected off his angular face. "The precursors were not destroyed by war, nor by disease, nor by famine. They achieved absolute perfection. They eliminated every threat to their existence. They solved every equation, cured every ailment, and created a society of absolute, unbroken peace and infinite abundance." Elias stepped closer, looking at the glowing alien script. "Then why did they leave?" "They did not leave, Captain. They simply ceased to exist," Kalen explained, an undercurrent of profound algorithmic distress in his voice. "Without struggle, without hardship, without the chaotic necessity to adapt and overcome, they lost their evolutionary momentum. Their culture stagnated. Their birth rates plummeted to zero. They experienced a collective, society-wide apathy. They had nothing left to fight for, nothing left to build, nothing left to discover. So, over the course of 10,000 years, they simply laid down in their perfect gardens and allowed themselves to fade into extinction." The silence of the ring suddenly felt less peaceful and far more terrifying. Vrax scoffed, a deep, rumbling sound of utter contempt. "They conquered the universe, only to be defeated by boredom? Pathetic. A warrior needs a war. A species needs a struggle. Peace is a poison if it is absolute." Lyra hugged her arms across her chest, shivering despite the perfect temperature. "It's beautiful, but it's dead. It's a museum for a species that forgot how to live." Elias looked up at the towering, silent spires, and then back at his crew. A broken human engineer, a wounded alien warlord, and a hyperlogical synthetic being. They were bruised, battered, and entirely imperfect. They were loud, chaotic, and driven by irrational emotions. But as they stood in the ashes of a perfect, dead civilization, one thing was absolutely clear. They were alive. "Perfection," Elias murmured, turning away from the glowing pedestal and looking toward the looming doors of the nearest spire, "is just another word for the end of the road. Let's go see what the gods left behind. We have a ship to fix and a galaxy to get back to." Chapter 9. The Gilded Cage. The massive doors of the central precursor spire did not slide open on mechanical tracks, nor did they swing on heavy hinges. As Elias approached, the seamless, silvery metal simply dissolved into a mist of subatomic particles, parting like a localized fog to allow the crew of the vagabond passage, before solidifying instantly behind them. Inside, the spire was a cathedral of light and silence. The interior was impossibly vast, defying the exterior dimensions of the structure. The walls were lined with millions of glowing, crystalline geometric nodes that pulsed with a slow, synchronized rhythm. There were no walkways, no stairs, and no visible interfaces. The floor was a glassy expanse that mirrored the towering vault above, making it feel as though they were walking across the surface of a perfectly still ocean suspended in the cosmos. Lyra looked around, her grease-smudged face reflecting the ambient white light. It's a data repository, a server room the size of a mountain. Kalen, what are we looking at? Kalen drifted slightly ahead, his own internal blue lights seemingly energized by the proximity to such vast, ancient technology. I am detecting exabytes of data flowing through these crystal matrices every microsecond. It is a complete archive. The history, the science, the philosophical treatises of the entire precursor civilization. All of it, perfectly preserved, locked away in the dark. Vrax's heavy boots clicked loudly against the glassy floor, the sound harsh and intrusive in the sacred silence. He gripped his makeshift titanium walking stick tightly. It is a hoard, a dragon sitting on a mountain of gold, entirely useless to the dead. Can you extract what we need to repair your vessel, machine? I do not possess the necessary physical interface, Kalen replied, his optical sensors scanning the smooth walls. There are no ports, no terminals. The technology is responsive to a biometric or telepathic frequency I cannot replicate. Let me try something, Elias said. He walked to the absolute center of the vast chamber. He took a deep breath of the perfectly synthesized air, closed his eyes, and spoke aloud, his raspy, human voice echoing endlessly into the heights of the spire. We are survivors of a dead ship. We are lost, we are stranded, and we are asking for help. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched, heavy and indifferent. Then, the rhythmic pulsing of the crystal nodes stopped. The ambient light in the room shifted from a cool, sterile white to a warm, golden hue. In front of Elias, the air began to shimmer and fold. Hard light coalesced, weaving together millions of photons to form a towering, three-dimensional projection. It was an entity of pure light. It possessed a vaguely humanoid silhouette, tall and elegant, but it had no facial features, no discerning gender, and no physical weight. It was merely an echo, an interactive ghost left behind by gods. Designation, custodian, the entity spoke. Its voice was not sound, but a direct telepathic projection that manifested inside their minds as a resonant, flawless chord. Anomaly detected. Biological composition unrecognized. Synthetic composition recognized as primitive. State your origin and purpose. I am Captain Elias Vance of the human vessel Vagabond, Elias answered, standing firm before the towering apparition. This is Chief Engineer Lyra, Navigator Kalen, and Commander Vrax of the Garoth Empire. We were fleeing a hostile force, initiated a blind jump using an ancient hypergate, and crashed into your system. Our ship is dead. We need a power source and navigational data to return home. The custodian remained motionless, but Elias could feel the weight of an ancient, unfathomable intellect scanning them. It was reading their heart rates, their brain waves, the chemical composition of their sweat, and the electrical impulses of their memories. Analysis complete, the custodian chimed. You are creatures of friction. Your DNA is riddled with mutations. Your psychology is driven by hormonal imbalances, fear, and aggression. Your lifespans are minuscule. You are inherently flawed, chaotic, and prone to self-destruction. The Garoth is a predator. The humans are paradoxes. The synthetic is bound by limitations. Vrax growled, stepping forward. We did not come here to be insulted by a ghost. Give us what we need, or we will take it. The custodian did not react to the threat. Violence is irrelevant here. This ring is the apex of existence. It is a sanctuary from the chaos of the universe. The golden light in a room intensified, projecting a hyper-realistic illusion around them. Suddenly, they were no longer in a server room. They were standing in a breathtaking landscape, rolling silver hills, endless blue skies, and cities that hummed with a quiet, infinite peace. You asked for a way back to your home, the custodian continued. Why? Your galaxy is burning. You flee from allies and enemies alike. You suffer from hunger, disease, war, and exhaustion. Your existence is a continuous, painful struggle against inevitable entropy. The projection shifted, showing Elias the scarred, dented hull of the Vagabond. It showed Vrax's crushed fleet. It showed the cold, sterile oppression of the Galactic Alliance. I offer you a reprieve, the custodian declared. This ring is self-sustaining until the end of time. Stay. I will heal your wounds. I will cure your biological imperfections. You will never know hunger, fear, or pain again. You can live here, in absolute harmony, forever. Why return to the darkness when you have found the light? It was a profound, terrifyingly tempting offer. Absolute peace. Immortality. The end of the struggle. Vrax looked at the perfect silver hills. He thought of the endless wars of the Garoth, the blood, the betrayal, and the cold void. Then he looked down at his ruined legs, bandaged with human duct tape. Kalen's processors spun, calculating the unparalleled efficiency of the precursor systems. Lyra stared at the illusion of the perfect city, her tired, aching shoulders slumping for a moment. Elias stepped forward, breaking the silence. He looked directly into the featureless face of the entity of light. No, Elias said. The word was quiet, but it carried the absolute, unyielding density of a dying star. The custodian flickered, a momentary glitch in its flawless projection. Your response is illogical. You reject salvation. We reject a cage, even if the bars are made of gold, Elias replied, a fierce spark igniting in his eyes. You said it yourself. We are creatures of friction. We are chaotic. We are flawed. But that friction is what makes the fire. You precursors built a perfect world, and it was so flawless, so devoid of struggle, that you forgot why you were alive in the first place. You didn't find peace. You just engineered your own obsolescence. Elias pointed a finger at the towering hologram. I love my ship. It's a broken, leaky bucket of bolts, but it's mine. I love my crew. We argue. We make mistakes, and we bleed. But every day we survive is a victory we earned with our own two hands. We don't want a paradise that we didn't build. We don't want immortality if it means giving up our drive. So keep your perfect gardens. We want our messy, painful, beautiful, chaotic galaxy back. Vrax slammed his titanium cane against the glassy floor, a sound like a gunshot. The human speaks the truth. A warrior who does not fight is a corpse that is still breathing. I reject your peace, ghost. And I, Lyra chimed in, a smirk breaking through the grime on her face, would go absolutely insane if I didn't have something broken to fix every morning. Even Kalen stepped forward. The absence of variables leads to a static equation. A static equation yields no new data. Therefore, stagnation is the ultimate failure of logic. We decline. The custodian stared at the four misfits. For a long, silent moment, the golden light of the illusion shattered, returning them to the cold, crystalline reality of the data repository. Fascinating, the custodian whispered, its cord-like voice vibrating with a new, strange harmonic. You choose pain because it guarantees presence. You choose death because it gives value to time. The floor beneath them hummed. A pedestal of solid, dark metal rose from the glassy surface. Resting upon it was a sphere the size of a human fist. It looked like a miniature galaxy trapped inside a glass marble, swirling with contained, impossible energy. This is a zero-point condenser, the custodian said. IT contains enough raw energy to re-initialize your primitive engines and reverse the polarity of the hypergate. Take it. Return to your chaos, creatures of friction, and burn brightly until you expire. Elias reached out and took the sphere. It was warm to the touch, vibrating with the heartbeat of a trapped star. He looked back at the fading hologram. "We fully intend to," Elias said. They turned their backs on the perfect paradise and began the long walk back to the vagabond. They were leaving heaven, and they had never felt more alive. Chapter 10. The Unyielding Grain of Sand. The walk back across the pristine, silent plaza of the Dyson Ring felt entirely different from their arrival. They were no longer desperate, suffocating castaways stumbling blindly into the unknown. They walked with purpose, carrying the beating heart of a dead civilization back to their beautifully broken ship. When they reached the vagabond, it looked remarkably pathetic sitting on the perfect, glowing silver grass. Its hull was scorched black, its plating was peeling, and it smelled faintly of oxidized metal and burnt wiring. Yet to Elias, it was the most beautiful sight in the universe. Lyra immediately descended into the engineering bay, cradling the zero-point condenser against her chest as if it were a newborn child. Vrax followed her down, his massive frame navigating the tight corridors with practiced care, ready to provide the heavy lifting required. Kalen interfaced directly with the ship's dormant primary diagnostic panel, his blue energy streams intertwining with the dead circuits, trying to establish a baseline for the monumental task ahead. "All right," Lyra's voice echoed up to the bridge, tight with a mixture of absolute terror and unrestrained mechanical excitement. "Elias, I am currently holding a sphere of infinite, self-sustaining quantum energy. I am about to plug it into an induction manifold that I literally patched with chewing gum and copper wire 3 weeks ago. If this goes wrong, we won't just blow up, we will be erased from the timeline." "No pressure, Chief," Elias called back, settling into the captain's chair. "Just treat it like a really fancy battery." Down below, Vrax easily hoisted the multi-ton primary containment shielding off the dead warp core, a task that would normally require heavy industrial lifters. Lyra carefully placed the glowing sphere into the center of the housing. "Kalen," Lyra shouted, "I need a harmonic frequency match. I can't force the energy. The ship has to ask for it." "Calculating," Kalen responded smoothly, aligning the ship's remaining electrical resonance to the phase variance of the condenser. Initiating handshake now. For a terrible, agonizing second, nothing happened. Then, a deep, resonant thrum echoed through the deck plates. It wasn't the ragged, desperate scream of the old impulse engines, nor was it the volatile whine of the antimatter core. It was a smooth, infinitely deep vibration of pure, unadulterated power. The emergency chemical lights abruptly shut off. A split second later, the primary lighting arrays flared to life. But they were no longer the harsh, sterile amber of human engineering. The light possessed a faint, warm golden hue, mirroring the energy of the precursor technology. The life support scrubbers engaged with a silent, flawless efficiency, immediately cycling out the stale air. The artificial gravity re-established itself with zero fluctuation. "Output is stable," Lyra reported, laughing, a bright, ringing sound of pure triumph. "Output is more than stable, Elias. We have power. We have infinite power. The kinetic shields are fully charged and operating at 600% above original specifications. We aren't just a ship anymore, Captain. We're a flying fortress." Elias smiled, gripping the control yoke. The ship felt different beneath his hands. It no longer felt like a struggling machine fighting against the void. It felt alive, eager, and terrifyingly capable. "Take us up," Elias ordered. The vagabond lifted off the silver grass without a single sound of exertion. It slipped effortlessly through the atmospheric containment field and back into the cold, silent vacuum of the Emerald Nebula. Below them, the majestic, dead Dyson Ring slowly shrank from view. A perfect, eternal tomb for a species that had forgotten how to struggle. "Setting coordinates for the hypergate," Kalen announced. "With our current energy reserves, we do not need to physically impact the trench. We can transmit a wake-up pulse directly to the gate's primary receiver." "Do it," Elias said. Ahead of them, the colossal, dark ring of the precursor gate responded instantly to the signature of the zero-point condenser. The golden veins of light flared to life, not slowly this time, but with a sudden, eager brilliance. The center of the ring tore open, revealing the blinding white Einstein-Rosen bridge. The vagabond didn't limp through the portal. It shot through it like a golden spear, leaving the unknown regions behind. The transition was instantaneous. The white light shattered, replaced by the familiar, chaotic, beautiful spray of the Milky Way galaxy. Kalen immediately began running stellar cartography. "We are back in our native galaxy," Kalen reported, his lights pulsing with a steady, content rhythm. "We are located on the extreme edge of the outer rim, Sector 9 Omega. We are completely off the grid. No Galactic Alliance patrols within 1,000 parsecs. No Garoth military signatures. We are in the deep black," Vrax noted, stepping onto the bridge. He was leaning on his titanium cane, but his posture was straight, his massive shoulders squared. He looked out at the starfield, a galaxy that held his enemies, his former empire, and endless war. Then, the towering Garoth commander looked at Elias. "Captain Vance," Vrax rumbled, his deep voice carrying a formal weight. "My dreadnought is destroyed. My fleet believes me dead. By the laws of the Garoth Empire, I am a ghost. I have no home to return to." Elias turned his chair around. "What are you saying, Vrax?" Vrax raised a massive fist and struck his chest, plating in a traditional salute of fealty, a gesture never before offered to a human. "I am saying that I have witnessed the strength of your pack. You are small, you are fragile, and you are entirely insane. But you possess a fire that the rest of the galaxy lacks. If you will have me, my strength is yours. I request permission to remain aboard the Vagabond." Elias looked at the giant alien, then at Kalen, and finally down the hatch where Lyra was humming a tune as she tinkered with the new God-tier engine. "Permission granted, Vrax," Elias smiled warmly. "But you're on dish duty this week." "I will conquer the dishes with honor," Vrax replied entirely seriously, causing Elias to burst into laughter. Elias walked over to his console, picked up his chipped thermal flask, and poured a fresh cup of dark, bitter coffee. He walked back to the viewport, staring out at the infinite expanse of stars. They were a tiny ship, a speck of dust in the grand cosmic scale. The Galactic Alliance still ruled with cold, unyielding logic. The Garoth Empire still conquered with brutal force. The universe remained a harsh, dangerous, and uncaring place. But as Elias took a sip of his coffee, feeling the heat anchor him to the present moment, he knew the truth. They were a crew composed of a broken engineer, a purely logical synthetic, a disgraced alien warlord, and a stubborn human captain. They were a walking paradox. They were the anomaly in the equation. They were the unyielding grain of sand in the gears of the cosmos. And with the heart of a god powering their battered ship, they were completely free to chart their own course into the dark. The Vagabond flared its golden engines and vanished into the sea of stars, ready to face whatever chaos tomorrow would bring. Life Lesson 10. The final lesson: the universe is vast, indifferent, and often terrifying, but your place within it is not determined by your size, your origin, or the perfection of your nature. True power lies in the bonds you forge with those who are fundamentally different from you. Embrace your flaws, stand fiercely by your chosen family, and never be afraid to chart a course into the unknown. You may be just a grain of sand, but a single, unyielding grain of sand is enough to change the entire landscape of the future.